I'm Jeremy Scahill from Dropsite News, dropsitenews.com, and this is our live stream for Tuesday, June 3rd. The Gaza genocide has now surpassed 600 days, and Israel is violently corralling Palestinians like cattle into an ever-shrinking stretch of the Gaza Strip against its western coast. It's now been 3 full months of Israel's blockade of Gaza. No significant quantities of medicine, fuel, or even food have entered Gaza. And as the starvation spreads and thousands of children face acute malnutrition, the fake aid distribution plan that's backed by the United States and Israel is proving to be exactly what we've been warning about: a death trap that exploits the hunger and desperation spreading throughout Gaza. Over the past 8 days, according to local health authorities, more than 100 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli occupation forces as they traveled to locations in southern Gaza, where a U.S. mercenary company is overseeing the distribution of paltry, small boxes of what can only be described as pantry items. Benjamin Netanyahu has made clear that this is not intended to be a program to actually address the humanitarian crisis or the starvation caused by his full-spectrum war of annihilation. Rather, it's a tool that Netanyahu is using as part of his quest to conquer Gaza, in his terms, and to remove all Palestinians from Gaza, Palestine. As we watch daily as Israel burns children alive, bombs buildings, crushing people to death, shreds children, conducting precision drone strikes on disabled people, and waging an unceasing campaign of terror bombings, we have just witnessed a week in which Hamas announced that it had accepted a proposal drafted in coordination with envoys representing President Donald Trump that was aimed at securing an end to the genocide. It would also have released all Israeli captives and hand over the administration of the Gaza Strip to an independent technocratic committee of Palestinians. Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, after Hamas announced that it had accepted this May 25th framework, came out and denounced Hamas. He then appears at the White House 2 days later with President Donald Trump and says, we're on the precipice of distributing what he called a new term sheet aimed at securing a temporary ceasefire. And when we obtained that term sheet that Steve Witkoff was talking about, it read like an Israeli wish list for a continuation of the genocide. We're going to talk about all of this with our next guest, but first I want to say good morning to my colleague at Dropsite News, Ryan Grimm.
Hello, Jeremy.
Good morning, Ryan. Our first guest today is Dr. Sami Al-Arian. He is a prominent Palestinian academic and activist. Some people may be familiar with his story. He spent around a decade in U.S. prisons and jails after being railroaded in a very political case on trumped-up charges not long after 9/11, and then eventually was deported from the United States. And it's important to say that the Justice Department under President George W. Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney tried to hit Sami Al-Arian with more than 50 felony charges, and a jury refused to convict him on any of those charges. Dr. Al-Arian is now the director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul's Zaim University. Dr. Sami Al-Arian, thanks so much for joining us again here at Dropsite News.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Sami, let's begin with the negotiation situation. Of course, we're going to talk about the ground reality in Gaza, but this really hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves. I mentioned a bit about the context of this, that Hamas and the Palestinian resistance last Sunday felt like they had a deal or a framework that they had drafted and had many concessions in it in consultation with Bashar al-Baba, who is a Palestinian American who jumped from being a Democrat to endorse Donald Trump because he believed that there was a better chance of ending the Gaza genocide under Trump. And he served as a sort of backdoor envoy dealing directly with Hamas. And so he was there with members of the Palestinian resistance working, but they were coordinating the whole thing with Steve Witkoff. So explain what the strategy was of the Palestinian resistance going into these direct and indirect talks with Trump's envoys starting a couple of weeks ago that led to them announcing they'd accepted this framework?
Very well. Let's review how we got here. Let's remember that we had an agreement that was signed back on January 17th and took hold on January 19th. That agreement was pushed by Trump and his envoy at the time, and today, Steve Witkoff. He's the one who actually told Netanyahu he needs to sign it. And there wasn't any two bones about it, in which pretty much was like an order or command, and Netanyahu did. What happened afterwards is that the resistance adhered to that agreement in every way, shape, and form. It was the Israelis that first refused to comply with the stipulation about the aid. So they started to block the aid starting March 2nd, and then they invaded and they violated that agreement on March 18th. And they never pursued a negotiated posture the way it was stipulated in the agreement. Then the Americans, after giving Netanyahu and his fascist cabinet about 2 months to so-called finish the job, meaning to make sure that they can either free their hostages, the captives, or they try to get the resistance to surrender. None of that happened. There was basically an attempt to pacify not only the resistance, but also to have wholesale deportation, wholesale expulsion of the Palestinians. There has been massacres after massacres after massacres during these 2 months, now 3 months, in which thousands of Palestinians have been killed, thousands been injured, and millions been displaced again. I mean, some families have been displaced 7 or 8 or 10 times. Then the Trump administration started negotiating again directly with the resistance, and the person who was assigned to this was Bishara Bahbah, who is, as you said, a Palestinian American who joined the Trump administration during the campaign, and he was rewarded with this being part of the negotiating team since he was credited with delivering so-called Arab vote in Michigan. At any rate, he reached an agreement with Hamas. That agreement was signed, or at least was agreed to, on May 25th. And both mediators, Arab mediators, Qatar and Egypt, were very much familiar with it, and they can also give credence to the fact that the Americans agreed to this. Everybody thought that this is an agreement that everybody could live with, that the Americans would be able to deliver the Israelis, and we will have a new agreement by which all the parties could start negotiating the future of this conflict. Hamas and the other factions, the other resistance, had always red lines in which there will never be any kind of an agreement unless, number one, there will be an understanding that this will terminate this genocidal war, that there will be an end to this war. Number two, that there will be full Israeli withdrawal by the end of this process. Number three, that there would be an exchange of the captives, of the hostages, according to a formula that was negotiated not just this time. Remember, there was back in November 2023, there was a formula because these were civilians. Then there was another formula for women soldiers. And then there would have been a third formula for the male soldiers. And that's what is left now. We're talking about 58 hostages, 58 captives, in which about 20 or so are alive. So all these were understood, but it was always the Israeli government that was very reluctant to pursue such a deal, that they always wanted to quote unquote have the resistance surrender and to have what is they called absolute or total victory, which has been elusive because they could never announce that. At any rate, after that, what happened is the Americans went to the Israelis. Ron Dermer was in Washington, in which the Israelis basically objected to every single point. There were 13 points in that agreement. Then Witkoff reneged on this, and this wasn't the first time, and I will talk about it in a second. He reneged on that and came with a different proposal. And he said to Hamas, basically, take it or leave it. You lost the war, speaking like Netanyahu, and therefore you must adhere to it. Otherwise, you'll be blamed, and we cannot restrain Netanyahu. That was basically the American position. And basically, he was saying, trust us, we'll try to get you there. But the resistance position is very simple. You did not keep your word. of the January 19th agreement, you actually backed Netanyahu, and you know fully well that was Netanyahu that violated the agreement. You have everybody testifying to that, everybody witnessing this, and yet you did not say a word about the Israelis violating the agreement. And then, on the eve of Trump coming to the region, when he visited Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, his lieutenants, his team came to Hamas and said, if you do a gesture for Trump, if you release this American, the only American captive that was left, who was also an Israeli soldier, he wasn't a civilian, he wasn't a bystander, then Trump will appreciate that very much coming to the region. He will announce that you have been cooperative, you have been serious, you have been a stakeholder in this, a serious stakeholder, and therefore he will push the Israelis not only towards an agreement, but also he will immediately, the second day, will resume aid. None of these promises came true. None. Idan Alexander was released without any price whatsoever. It was a gamble that the Hamas faction took, and it failed to produce any relief for the Palestinians. And now, for the third time in a row, they come and have an agreement with Hamas, and yet they renege on every single point. And then Witkoff has the audacity of coming and saying it was Hamas that is insisting on unreasonable or unrealistic conditions. There are no conditions here. He knew all along that the end result of this is not to strip the resistance from whatever leverage it has in terms of these captives. The end result should be to stop this carnage, this mayhem, this genocide that the Palestinians have been subjected to now for 600 days. They really have no shame whatsoever to play with this, including, of course, now we have, in addition to this genocide, we have a starvation policy. There hasn't been a single truck coming in since March 2nd, and then they come with this fictitious plan in which they were trying to push the Palestinians into very small, narrow land by negotiating some kind of aid, 20, 30 trucks, while the need is about 600 trucks. So this is where we have been now. Hamas tried to come back, trying to marry both proposals, trying to be conciliatory, or at least appear that it has accepted some of these things in its new proposal without giving up its red lines of stopping the war, the withdrawal of Israel, the resumption of aid, and the rehabilitation.
So, Sami, in the original agreement between Witkoff and Hamas, there was a provision in it that said that Hamas would give up governance to a technocratic committee that would then oversee governing and reconstruction. In the agreement that Witkoff then cut with the Israelis, that provision was stripped out. When Hamas resubmitted its new conciliatory provision, they reinserted the provision that they would give up governance and authority over reconstruction to this technocratic committee. So what is happening here? Why is this a provision that Hamas is insisting on and that Israel continues to strip out?
Excellent observation. What's happening here is that Israel has always said, we don't want Hamas to rule Gaza. We don't want October 7th surprise to come again. And there is a lot of talk since day one about the so-called day after. So Hamas came with this and said, okay, what is it that you want? We want you to be out of Gaza. You can't rule Gaza. So through the Egyptian mediation and months of negotiations, they came up with the idea, the Egyptians came up with the idea, which Hamas and the other resistance groups accepted, that Hamas will even though they are the elected party, they will move away from ruling Gaza, and that there will be a commission or a committee, which will be independent, technocratic, that will be given the task of taking care of Gaza in terms of ruling it and dispensing of all the affairs of Gaza. And the Israelis all along rejected that, because their idea is not to have any Palestinian in charge of Gaza. What they want, basically, two things. One is to reoccupy Gaza, take the land, or in the words of Trump, to make it Riviera of the Middle East. He's trying to look at this as a real estate opportunity, where the Israelis want to bring back settlements in order to please their settler supporters, But also, more importantly for them, they found this to be an opportunity to solve their problem. And what is their problem? It's the demographic problem. Israel, after Oslo, had to choose 2 out of 3 things in order to look at what would be the future of this region. They want it to be called a Jewish state. In other words, having Jewish majority. They want to call themselves a democratic state. And of course, what they mean by that is a Jewish democratic state, not democratic state for all the citizens. And the land. If they choose to be democratic and Jewish, that would have been the 2-state solution. 78% of historical Palestine is Israel and 22% the Palestinians. They didn't want to do that. So they always rejected that. So over the course of 32 years, the number of settlers went up from 125,000 in 1993. Today, they exceeded 800,000. And the person who's in charge of this settlement policy is Smotrich, who is saying day in and day out that we would like to bring, and this year he brought 22 new settlements. We want that number to become 1 million, and then we're going into our 2nd million. If they had chosen to be democratic and keep all the land, that's a 1-state solution that no Zionist party is accepting, because that would defeat the whole Zionist idea. So what they chose is the 3 things. They wanted to be called Jewish, they cannot be called democratic, and they want to keep the whole land. That meant an apartheid regime, which brought a problem for them, because the whole world cannot accept this over the long term. And indeed, even someone like President Carter, back in 2007, he wrote a book called Peace, Not Apartheid. Even John Kerry, in his waning days in December 2016, upon the election of Trump, he said he had an address in which he says we're going into an apartheid. The whole world was calling apartheid. The Israelis didn't know how to deal with this. October 7th came, and now they think that there is a 4th way, which is genocide, which is expulsion, mass expulsion. They can solve this demographic problem, and therefore they don't want any Palestinian to be in charge of Gaza. What they want is to expel as many Palestinians from Gaza. And if they can do that, then their next step is to expel as many Palestinians from the West Bank, thinking that they can get rid of their demographic problem. Now they can have the land, they can be called Jewish, they can be called democratic, and damn the Palestinians and damn the whole world.
Sami, one of the Hamas officials that speaks publicly for the group had an interview earlier this week on Al Jazeera Mubashar, Mahmoud Mardawi, and he was saying basically that Hamas really believed last Sunday that the framework that they were signing was genuinely approved by Steve Witkoff. And in fact, in my discussions with Hamas officials, you have one level on which everyone knows that the Israelis are pushing the agenda here, that this isn't assumed. No one is running around thinking that there's any kind of independent brokering going on. But I got the sense, and I think you have this sense too, that they felt like Witkoff was going to now take this. They might not get every single thing that they discussed, but that the Americans felt that Hamas's position was an acceptable position to negotiate. And then they go to the Israeli side, and what happens is not that Israel objects to some of the terms, but Israel then puts through, once again, its own maximalist demands about everything. And Netanyahu publicly says that they're going to resume the genocide, that they're going to resume the war, and that this is just a ploy to get as many captives released from Gaza as possible in as short of a time frame as possible so that they can move on with the war of annihilation. I want to get your sense of what game you think the Trump administration is playing here, because on the one hand, there are indications that Trump feels like this should wrap up. He did give Netanyahu 2 months to just completely try to wage his war of extermination and annihilation. But then you have Witkoff sort of morphing into Antony Blinken now, where he is actively serving as an agent of the Israeli agenda rather than even pretending to be an independent broker. He's just constantly denouncing Hamas, and there's nothing critical stated about Israel and the fact that it blew up the original deal that Witkoff himself presided over. So, Sami, what's your assessment of what's going on here with the Trump administration and its conduct here?
True that the Americans are speaking from both sides of the mouth. And it's not just on Gaza, but on Ukraine and other issues. The problem here, of course, is that someone like Witkoff will negotiate in secret through his lieutenants, through Bashar al-Bahbah, through Adam Boehler, and then they will say and promise certain things. They go to the Israelis, and then the Israelis' way of thinking, the Israeli position prevails. And this has been basically what's been happening all along. So the question now is, is Hamas being deceived by the Trump administration, being led in one way, and then they come back and says that they have changed and therefore they can blame Hamas? Or is it that they are so incompetent in which the Zionists will always have the upper hand, and that they cannot actually, I wouldn't say dictate, but they can't have any kind of leverage, even though with one phone call, Trump could call Netanyahu and tells him, listen, if you do not go along with this is what I want. I want to stop this war. I want to stop this bloodshed. I want to stop these massacres. I want to stop this genocide. And you need also to get the captives out. The only way to do that is by stopping the war. And if you don't do it, there will be no more American largesse. There will be no more American weapons. There will be no more American protection in the Security Council or other places. There will be a warrant for your arrest, and we're not going to stand and pressure other governments not to do this. He can give it. He has all kinds of cards, but he's not playing them. Now, experts would tell you that when it comes to non-state actors like Hamas and Hezbollah, the United States gives Israel pretty much what it wants, free hand. But when it comes to state actors like Iran, it puts restraints, because that means that American interest could be impacted in a very, very severe, in a very drastic way. And that's why they will never allow them to attack Iran, for example. And that the United States knows that if Israel attacks Iran, there will be consequences in which maybe the whole world economy could be impacted and collapse. And therefore, the question now is, will the US government, will the Trump administration be fed up with Netanyahu and try to pressure him to the point like the same they did back in January in order to end this war, or will they let him drag it along? Now, let's remember that there are not too much time for Trump. He has a very ambitious agenda. He knows that most likely in the midterm elections in 2026, he would lose the House, in which case his agenda will also be curtailed, and there will be some problems. And he needs to get as much done as possible. And that means this time that he gave Netanyahu now 3 months to pacify, to end, to eradicate, whatever term they use for the resistance, is not working. Actually, now there is a war of attrition. It is the Israeli army that is also suffering. You have all kinds of host of problems domestically within the Israeli society itself, in which Trump has really no patience to wait. So the question now is, will Trump allow Netanyahu to be the tail that wags the dog, or will Trump be the person who's holding the leash on the neck of Netanyahu? I thought that to answer this question is whether we're going to have an end of this war or not. I'll give it another week. If we don't have in a week an end to this war, then it is the tail that is wagging the dog.
The Iran talks are, I think, playing an interesting kind of interplaying role here, and Witkoff is overseeing both of them, which I've heard from American sources is presenting its own logistical problem. That Witkoff, just as a matter of just physical material fact, doesn't have the amount of time to focus in on everything that he's doing, which also includes Ukraine. And so the same day that he is sending a proposal to the Iranians, a full proposal, he's also getting a rejection and dealing with the Israelis on the proposal that he had crafted earlier. And it has led to an enormous amount of confusion, because Witkoff has said publicly, as Marco Rubio has said, that there can be zero enrichment in any final deal. Witkoff has also said there can be civilian nuclear enrichment. According to Axios, Barak Ravid had a story, I believe it was yesterday, time kind of blends together, citing 2 sources with direct knowledge of the proposal, saying that the Witkoff offer to the Iranians included allowing some type of civilian nuclear program, and it might be in consortium with the Gulf states, but it would allow civilian enrichment on Iranian soil. Donald Trump, 5 hours later, after enormous fury erupts from Tel Aviv, goes on to his social media outlet, Truth Social, and says there will be zero enrichment, which of course then is a red line for Iran. So what can we understand about what the actual offer is from the U.S. to the Iranians?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that you have one person who's acting like the effective Secretary of State. That's Steve Witkoff, someone who's never been confirmed by anybody, has never been accountable to anybody except to Trump. I think that's the first probably in America's history when it comes to one person, one envoy having all these very crucial files. You have the Gaza file, the Iran file, and the Ukraine file. Leaving that aside, my information, which is confirmed through what has been reported by officials in Iran, is that indeed the letter that was sent by the Americans does concede, and this is very much confirmed, concedes the right of Iran to enrich uranium. So that point's already been conceded by the United States, which opened the possibility of reaching an agreement. The second point, they wanted to freeze that enrichment. The Americans wanted to freeze that enrichment and offered that there could be a regional hub by which there could be enrichment activities in which Iran can participate. Now, the details are not very clear, but the Iranians are very much encouraged by the fact that the Americans have already conceded the point that Iran was not willing to walk away. It was willing to walk away if that was never conceded. So the fact that the Americans have already conceded this point, that opens the possibility of an agreement. The Americans offered the 3.67%. I think whether it's 3.67% or more or less, obviously it's going to be less than 20% depending on the application. It's something probably that is subject to negotiations. But the Americans never talked about the ballistic program, the rocket program, or the support of other non-state actors, particularly when it comes to Israel-Palestine. So having the fact that the Americans are not tying or linking these subjects, and that the Americans conceded the point, the possibility of reaching an agreement now is much, much higher than it was a week or 10 days ago or even a month ago. Will the Israelis accept this? Will they sabotage? They will definitely do everything in their power to sabotage this. But again, because this is a state actor and the implications of any military strike on Iran is going to be catastrophic, not only against US interests, but globally it will be felt. I think the Americans will be very, very careful not to allow the Israelis to sabotage it. The details about how a regional hub would take place, we can see, for example, that yesterday the Iranian foreign minister was in Egypt. This is a first. I mean, the last time an Iranian foreign minister was in Egypt was decades ago. So that tells you that there's something going on. The fact that Egypt now is part of the equation. Let's remember back in 2005, when the NPT was being ratified, the last country to ratify it was Egypt. Egypt has always been concerned about the Israeli nuclear program because it could be the first country that could be impacted. And at the time, they signed with the pressure of the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, on the promise that Bush promised at the time that the Israeli nuclear program will always be on the table and it will also be dealt with, that either there will be an attempt to bring Israel to the NPT, which is absolute lie, or there will be peace in the region where there is no need to worry about. But of course, both were just bold-faced lies. So at any rate, so there is something going on in the region. Saudi Arabia wants to be part of that consortium. So if you have Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Iran, I'm sure that the Israelis will not be happy with this. So there is a lot going on, and it seems like the Trump administration is toying with many ideas. And let's remember that before Trump came to the region, he had his differences with Netanyahu. It wasn't to the point of strategic differences. These were tactical ones. Nevertheless, he angered him when he surprised him with the direct negotiation or indirect negotiations with Iran. He surprised him with his stand on Syria, in which he said, "You go and have negotiations with Turkey. I'm not standing with you on that." And then he met with the president of Syria. So he's doing a lot of stuff that he hasn't consulted with Netanyahu, something that the Israelis are not used to.
Actually, Jeremy, we can go ahead if you have one follow-up.
Yeah.
One thing, and then you can ask. Just curious how the Iranian negotiators respond to the incoherence from the Americans, from Trump, from Witkoff, from the various stories that are putting out publicly. But Jeremy, go ahead if you have one too, because I know we got to get to Eyad.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Sami. I'll answer that, and then I'll follow up.
Is very, very complex. Unfortunately, people in the West do not understand that. They think it's in the hands of the supreme leader, and no, that's not how it's done. There are at least 4 different groups or 4 different stakeholders. So Iran's decision making is done very, very carefully and very methodically. They do have their red lines. The only thing they get from the supreme leader is what the red lines are. And the red line was very simple. You cannot abdicate the right, or you cannot give up the right of Iran to enrich uranium. Now, the details, they can work it out. That has already been conceded by the United States. Right. Now, the 4, and I'm very quickly, I know you're probably in a hurry, the 4 are, first of all, you have the foreign ministry. They have to weigh in. There is another group which is made of experts. These are the people who have been part of this negotiating process since the early 2000s. These are very, very seasoned diplomats and seasoned experts on the issue of nuclear power and nuclear energy and nuclear weaponry. And they have their own group in which they have to weigh in the decision. Then you have the National Security Council led by the president himself. And there are 2, I mean, this is made about 30 plus people, and 2 of them are representing the supreme leader. And then you have the actual negotiators who are also weighing in when it comes to the national security issues. So all these will have to, I'm talking about institutions now, I'm not talking about individuals. There are institutions in the country that will have to weigh in because they are impacted by these decisions. The main issue right now, I do not think it's the nuclear issue. I think the main issue of contention for the Iranians is how we're going to handle the sanctions. They want this to be at the same time, concurrently, while they are negotiating the nuclear limits and the nuclear technical stuff. The Americans don't want to give up any ease any of the sanctions until they reach certain points, and I think that's where probably the negotiations will go next. The Iranians want to see some relief concurrently with their nuclear limitations, and whether the Americans will agree to that or not, we will know in the next round or 2.
Sami, we only have like 2 minutes left, but clearly over the past year in particular, but over this period of the genocide, Netanyahu has gone on an arson campaign across the region. There was the back and forth with Iran. There is the ongoing situation with Ansar Allah, with their very effective maritime blockade. Ansar Allah made a ceasefire agreement. I really think that Ansar Allah forced the Trump administration basically into that ceasefire agreement because they just couldn't destroy their military capabilities that are largely hidden within vast mountain ranges in Yemen. And the Ansar Allah actually got a deal where they didn't stop bombing Tel Aviv, and they didn't end their maritime blockade. It's an extraordinary story that I think has not really been put in a proper context on a tactical level. But you also had this direct meeting with Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, who now known as al-Shara, the interim so-called president of Syria. And Trump basically said to him when there was it's almost like a quid pro quo that the United States is going to lift these sanctions. But then Trump, in the brief meeting they had, says, you need to get on board with the Abraham Accords and normalize relations with Israel. Trump then said on Air Force One as he was leaving that meeting, he thinks it's going to eventually happen. I want to get your read regionally, but I really want to hear your assessment of what's happening in terms of Israel's posture towards Syria. It's repeatedly bombing the country. It has seized even more territory deep inside of Syria itself. And you have Trump on the other flank saying that Jolani has to normalize relations with Israel. So just briefly, your thoughts on Syria and Israel specifically.
Sure. But before that, let me just say, if they couldn't defeat the Houthis, do you think they can defeat Iran? I mean, that's a big thing. I mean, for people saying you bomb Iran, they couldn't even defeat the Houthis. They couldn't stop the missiles of the Houthis. Going back to Sharia and Israel's policy. Israel's policy towards Syria is very simple. They want to fragment. They want to divide Syria into 4 zones, into a Kurdish zone in the north under the protection of the Americans, into a southern zone of the Druze under the protection of the Israelis, into the western one, Alawites, hopefully they were hoping under the protection of the Russians, and the Sunni heartland under the Turks. That's the Israeli plan, is to divide Syria into 4 different cantons. And of course, no one is going to accept this. Of course, they have their own relations, but that's their policy, in addition to try to degrade as much of the military capability as possible. Now, Trump wants the Sharia government to be part of the so-called Abraham Accords, which is nothing but raising the hegemony of Israel over the whole region. The problem here is it's a huge problem, and I do not understand the policy of the current regime, because he would be abdicating. His name is Abu Muhammad al-Julani because he comes from the Golan Heights. That's what he comes. And Israel has already annexed the Golan Heights. Trump has already recognized that's annexation. So I do not understand the logic behind this government. Are they willing to give up the land in which both Assad's father and son refused to give up 1 inch of? How does that make them nationalistic, patriotic? How do they make them really Syrian? So there's a lot of people who are asking all these questions, but no answers have been forthcoming. I don't think that Trump would meet with him unless he had some assurances or at least some promises that they are willing to join this. So there's a lot of question marks. A lot of Syrians are asking a lot of questions. I know they are very weak, and I know they have to build up their country, but no one builds their country by giving up part of its territory. So there's a lot of mystery here, there's ambiguity here that needs to be explained by the current regime. I do not believe that the Israelis want any kind of a peace agreement. What they want is to fragment Syria, and that's why they continue to occupy it and continue to have hostile policies toward them.
All right, Dr. Sami Al-Arian, thanks as always for your insights and for joining us here at DropSite News.
Thank you.
Also recommend people follow Sami on X, formerly known as Twitter. He often is ahead of the curve on developments happening in the negotiations and politically within Palestine. And we are actually going to go to Palestine right now, to Gaza, to join Eyad Amawi. He is a coordinator with the Gaza Relief Committee. He coordinates and helps to coordinate NGOs that are operating in the Gaza Strip. He recently published a really powerful op-ed piece in The Guardian titled, "I've seen the reality of the new Israel-backed aid," in quotes, for Gaza. It's nothing more than a deadly PR stunt. Eyad is a tireless advocate for the civilian population of Gaza, and we're also really honored that we're in regular touch with him, and he's keeping us updated all the time. Friend, thank you very much for joining us from Gaza.
You are welcome, my colleagues, Jeremy and Ryan. I hope you are well, and appreciated your interest with our humanitarian crisis still ongoing here.
Eyad, we said at the top of this live stream that according to local health authorities, more than 100 Palestinians have been killed in the past 8 days since this Gaza aid scam that Netanyahu and Trump foisted on the people of Gaza unfolded. Give us the latest situation on the ground right now.
Yeah. The latest situation here is worsening more and more. This morning, the Israeli forces forced expulsion for thousands and thousands of people in Khan Yunis, especially to the coastal area. It's shrinked. It's less than more 40 square kilometers. You can imagine thousands of people are crowded there without shelters, tents, foods, sweet waters, and they let them just in the street. It's an unbelievable situation here from eyewitnesses as my testimonies. I went there at this morning, and I find my camps there. There's no shelters remains for the people after the repeated expulsions for them. You can imagine when the GHF announced for those hopeless people to go there and to bring or seek some foods without any directions, without any real and tangible changes in the amount of the foods that come into the Gaza, nothing really here happened. The situation here is really catastrophic, Jeremy. And until this moment, we lose more than 100 of martyrs, according to the GHF announcement. And we, until this moment, also lose more than 60 children from the famine. So the situation has become worse more and more by the ongoing time.
Can you describe what the process would be for people who are on the coast and who are told by the GHF, the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that okay, now is the time that you can come to X place to receive these boxes of, and describe what's in the boxes. What is that process like for people?
Look, when we compare their announcement and their fake call for the people to go there and seek the foods, there is no comparison. When I achieve there is no database. They randomizing the distribution systems. They don't depend on the local employees. The people just achieve there with a huge amount of populations, seek foods, and they lose the control directly and let people do what they need to do. You can imagine this amount of population when they come to the one place to distribute the food. We expect directly the creative chaos. So we expect they need to do something like that to increase the suffering. When I went yesterday to the Netzarim access point, and I have witnesses from multiple of peoples there, they still waiting from the early morning hours to achieve the Netzarim access point. It's a military base there around the GHF centers. So it's not comparable to any NGOs or United Nations organization that will work in the green zone with the safety concerns that save their safety for our peoples and distribute under database systems. They normalize and with the fairness. So there is no comparison. In my thoughts, they need to create creative chaos to increase the suffering here by this unsystemized and randomizing the distribution also.
The Israelis responded to their own massacres of Palestinians, and many in Palestine, in Gaza, started referring to these massacres outside of the so-called aid sites as the Witkoff massacres because of Steve Witkoff's blocking of a ceasefire deal after Hamas had agreed to it, and actually agreed to terms that said that Hamas would give up governance of the Gaza Strip, which is supposedly a key demand of both the Trump administration and Netanyahu. And what Israel did then was to release a video claiming that it depicted Hamas fighters shooting and killing Palestinians who were going to pick up flour. And there's a substantial amount of evidence to indicate that, in fact, the people that were doing the killing there, the shooting there, were part of a private gang, the Abu Shabaab gang, that is directly supported by Israel. And yet that narrative has stuck. And at a minimum, what's happening is people are saying, well, the people in Gaza who are really Hamas, they're saying that it was the Israelis that killed the starving Palestinians. But actually, the good guys, the Americans and the Israelis, are saying, no, it's just like Hamas has been doing this all throughout the past 19 months. They're hoarding aid, they're stealing aid. And I don't know if you saw this, Eyad, but a few days ago, David Satterfield, who was the top humanitarian aid official under Joe Biden for the duration of this genocide when Biden was president, was asked on CNN about Hamas stealing aid, hoarding aid, and selling aid. And Satterfield himself, who is a very pro-Israel guy, said that he never saw any significant evidence whatsoever, nor did the Israelis provide the United States with any evidence whatsoever to back up the claim that Hamas was doing anything like that. So what is the reality on what is your understanding of the facts?
Yeah, look, this is very important questions from you, Jeremy. Look, the Americans, politicians, and the Israeli, they still announce the UN umbrella organization here working over the ground, still lit the aids. The chaos that handmade by the Israeli, they kill all of the volunteers who is responsible for securing the convoy of the trucks and kill the blue police here, and they let the looters do what they need to do. After that, all of the community will lose the control over everything. So it's maybe I mentioned that before. They use the step-by-step maps to increase the suffering until the full collapsation. So it's not easy to distinguish that day by day. When they hit the four maybe huge buildings that tower with 100 civilians to kill one person, claiming that the Hamas exists in these buildings, as a humanitarian aids and as a paramedics here, when we went there to rescue who is remaining alive, we find nothing there militarized, nothing exists that threat Israel. So they use these illusions to comprehend and to clarify their ongoing killing for us and for our people here. So it's very easy to distinguish between the reality here over the ground and the illusion that they still made. So when we talk about the GHF organization, I mean it's a fake organization. All of our community and that mentioned a lot of times, they bring our peoples to the death trap. You can distinguish this. And after they lose the control, they let the troops and the tanks kill our peoples and prevent the paramedics to went there and to rescue the casualties from there. It's a horrible time. And from my point of view as a humanitarian coordinator here, we haven't time to still waiting this clarifications, and it's unbelievable and illogical to accept that.
You may or may not have seen the latest development here in the United States, which is that the Boston Consulting Group, which is the consulting firm that helped stand up to the extent that GHF can even be considered to have stood up. The consulting group that backed that firm has now withdrawn from supporting GHF, has cut its contract with them, and put the partner of the firm who brought the business in on leave. Essentially publicly disciplining the partner that connected Boston Consulting Group with this catastrophe. According to the Washington Post, which reported this, Boston Consulting Group was making the wheels turn for GHF. Was involved in a lot of the negotiations with the contractors, setting prices. What is your understanding of what it means to have Boston Consulting Group withdraw from GHF, and how long can this quote unquote aid operation continue?
Yeah, it's very important. Before a couple of days, Israeli let maybe 80 trucks of flowers. It's a very little amount to come in without announcement, without any preparation with the UN organization, and they let them come in from the Karam Abu Salim cross point. All of the peoples, thousands of them, attack these trucks and get the flowers, as you maybe have seen for the video clips. The consultant company that leave the GHF, I mentioned that before while you mentioned that. It's a very important note. Over the ground, no tangible actions that can GHF do in this catastrophe. In my thoughts, the American GHF have reached a new consensus that without UN community, nothing will happen here, and the suffering will increase. So the resignation and the leaving of the GHF from a lot of people, so from the beginning until this moment, it's the bad indications that the failure will occur soon, more than they expected that. You can imagine when our people, I see that from my eyewitnesses, attack the GHF warehouses, the only warehouses in Rafah, and the Americans company, security company, see them with a huge amount of population. They surprised how we can deal with these people who is starving more than 90 days without food, without water. So the position of the GHF, I think they will leave soon the Gaza. Even thought what they announced on posting in their Facebook pages, they will continue supporting Gaza. It's a fake news. In our thoughts, without hundreds of distribution centers that related to the United Nations, nothing here real will happen. So I will refer and quote it to the Jeremy when he mentioned the Witkoff. Our peoples here, they write Witkoff massacres in their pages and they comment over the GHF website. And we hope that the Americans politicians will change their opinion soon. We have here 2.5 million people still waiting the main meal to stay alive. So nothing to do more than sending a human appeal to the world. And the GHF must announce mustn't used by the Israeli as a tool to increase our suffering. And they're related to the Americans community. Hatred and the hateful speech will increase. I mean that our children here is emaciated, their bodies lose their weights rapidly, nothing to do for them in this moment. When I talk to you, and we are in the Nasser Hospital and the Al-Aqsa Hospital, a lot of bodies come amputated and burned, and they also suffered from the famine. So no time for us as a human here to wait the GHF to increase their support and to prepare their new warehouses until all of our people will die. So they must understand it's a responsibility for the international community to stop this fake and illusion to be implemented over us.
Yeah. Eyad, your connection is breaking up there a little bit. I'm going to ask you if you can just for one moment. Can you disconnect and reconnect? Oh, maybe it got better there. Let me just hear you though. Yeah. Why don't you just log off and then log back on for a moment, Eyad? You can go off and then come back.
3 minutes too, though.
Okay. Yeah. It's really important what he's saying, and I want to make sure that people hear this. And I also, this morning, Ryan, I was looking at a map of the forced displacement, some of the new orders that are coming down. And actually, a friend of mine, her husband's family is from Khan Yunis, and she told me this morning that now they are being forcibly displaced and they're going to central Gaza, where Eyad is speaking to us from. But if you look at the latest Israeli forced displacement maps, it's clear that what is happening is that they're pushing people into a central area along the coast. You have this huge area, which is largely sand dunes of al-Mawasi, where a lot of people have been forced. And I think it bears repeating that when people are forced into al-Mawasi, that area also has been repeatedly bombed. Some of the footage that people may have seen of tents on fire, children burning alive, civilians just being slaughtered, that's from this area of al-Mawasi. But where Eyad is and where our colleague Abu Bakr Abed was based in Deir al-Balah was really the last city standing, so to speak, in the Gaza Strip. And you had secondarily, Khan Yunis had some infrastructure left. Well, in the past days here, we've seen a very intense bombing campaign unleashed on Khan Yunis. And what's clear is that the Israelis are trying to make it entirely unsurvivable to stay anywhere that Israel doesn't choose to allow it to stand. So, and then in the north, where most Palestinians are, there's just been mass carpet bombing that has taken place. It's also where some of the fiercest armed resistance against the Israelis has unfolded. There have been relatively high casualties among Israeli forces there, and that area is still being totally starved out. And our colleague Anas Al-Sharif from Al Jazeera is still there, is still posting videos, but it's a state of terror bombing, but it's beyond that. The aim of it seems to be now to really push everyone toward the sea and to entrap them along that coast. And Eyad, I know you only have a moment left, but I did want to ask you about this. It seems like the Israelis are now forcing the population. Deir al-Balah still, relatively speaking, has some infrastructure, unlike most other places in Gaza. But it does seem now like there is this push to drive people toward the sea and entrap them in essentially just like a half moon area in the center of Gaza, center South Gaza, right up against the sea.
Yeah, of course, I agree completely with you. From my witnesses here, our people, they force them to be expulged. Maybe we must distinguish between two idioms. Displacement have safe dignity for the people, but expulsion without any needs, without any things, you can go and walk in the street. Maybe you lose your children. I know a lot of our peoples in the north, they lose their children when they under the intensifying bombing, and they force them to leave their homes. This is a horrible scenes, I know. But when we speak about a huge amount of population, they grabbed and tied under the half of moon, the western of the Gaza Strip, as engineering. From my work of the engineering association, there is no infrastructure that will meet those amount of people. The sewage water in the street and the infection diseases will spread rapidly, more than we expect, especially in the summer conditions here, and without any shelters, without any healthy conditions. And also, you push what they need to cleansing the lands. When they destroy completely the Nur al-Ka'bi Center for kidney dialysis, I can't recognize what they need, even thought just the killing of people and force them to leave the Gaza. From my thoughts as a Palestinian here, we link to our roots here, rooted in our land. We will not leave, because nothing exists out of the Gaza more best from our land. But we need from the war to change the real politician opinion, and put the sanction over the Israel to stop the genocide. As a human being, we didn't need more announcement and no more the media position. What we need here to more UN interventions, urgent interventions, with the humanitarian corridors under the protection of the international community to rescue our children. Especially in the north of the Gaza. Anas al-Sharif talked to you maybe a lot of times, and I speak with my colleagues in the Gaza Relief Committee. We haven't any ability to rescue people from the thirsty also in the summer, today and yesterday. Unimaginable conditions that will increase the death cases, and from the also from the intensifying and from the famine here. Everyone here from my families, I know they lose everything that can deal with these situations.
And
I speak a lot about the horrible times, but really we haven't time to stay waiting any change, and any tangible actions will happen in the next few hours. Our people here linked to the hope when the Mr. Woodcock announced that he didn't accept. It's a matter between he and the Israel and Hamas. But as a human being here, we need the UN interventions directly with the humanitarian corridors under the protection of the UN agencies. Really, when you see the situation, I send a human appeal. All of the journalists come to the Gaza and take the photos from your eyes. Don't depend on the local journalists. Okay, the Israeli killed most of them. and a lot of them, under the clarification, they're related to the Hamas or militants. But you can see by your eyes, come to the Gaza with a Dr. Victoria, who's come from Britain, and he's a residential surgeon in the Nasser. She received a long deal with a lot of casualties that come from the GHF base, military base, I care. And she have witnesses and testimonies that said no one of them are militants. Those civilians come with emaciated bodies. They need food just from here.
Eyad, I know you have to go in one moment. I just had one quick final question for you. That the Gaza Ministry of Health is saying that the total number of killed so far in last night's massacre has risen to 27. And so I'm curious. This is not the first as massacre, not even the second of this week related to aid distribution. Palestinians are sophisticated people. When they think about heading towards these distribution centers, knowing that so many massacres continue to happen there, what is the thought process like when you're deciding whether or not to go for the slim possibility of getting limited assistance, given also the possibility that the IDF will open fire?
This is important questions. Look, I mean, the security company that worked in the warehouses there, they face and they're surprised by the amount of people, and they let the Israeli deal with them because they haven't ability to distribute enough foods and enough amount of foods. Yesterday, if you noted something very important, they announced they distributed 5 million meals. It's not real. When you open the basket, you can find small bottles of the preserved foods. They account every piece in this basket for one family, and they multiple them as 5 million meals. It's not real. The one basket is enough for one family would consist of 5 or 6 members for 3 days at maximum. So you can imagine you will repeat your deadly trip to the GHF again and again. So if you rescue yourself by the first time, you will not rescue yourself at the next trip. So they judge over of our peoples to be died by the shooting, by smoking, by the deadly trip for the long distance to go there. And they haven't any system really. They throw the boxes and the basket over the ground and let people come in and take, who have a strong body, he can take one basket. The others, women and orphans and elderly people and who have suffering from the kidney dialysis cannot reach there and get one basket food. So this is maybe some of the forest rules that they poses of ourselves, and we haven't any choice. Our people haven't choice. I know a lot of people here. They need to go more than one because he have 50 members of his families and children in that one tent that is still waiting one loaf of bread. So the annunciation repeated fake and illusion for us. I hope this is very clear for you, my colleagues, and we need your clarifications, and the humanity must support the reality over the ground and let the United Nations to do what they need to do. And they have experienced more than from the 50 years, 1948. I know my grandfather, he's still alive. He talked to me a lot. The United Nations have a good experience and have a database and a well-known employee here, especially for the United and international community. They're still working with us, and they just need their trucks to come into the Gaza. Thank you very much.
All right, Eyad Amawi, we always keep you in our thoughts, and we're so grateful. And I really want people who are watching this to understand also that Eyad is around the clock, just working on trying to get facts out. He's also trying to get information to journalists from every news organization, and has spent so many days of the past more than 19 months of this Israeli genocide just pleading with people to document the story, to try to speak up. And we're really grateful for you, Eyad, and all of your work. Our love and our gratitude to you and your family.
Yeah, I am my gratitude, and I feel honored to be with you, Mr. Jeremy and Ryan. Really, Drop Site is making a tangible change in the awareness of the world. I know I followed you from the beginning of the war, and your articles and your efforts. Really, as a human being, we appreciated your attendance in our life. Go ahead. We will not give up. We will continue to stand, even though what's still happening here in Gaza. I apologize. I need to leave because I have another meetings with the circle table and the CNN. So I will talk again about the suffering
All right.
here. Okay.
Thank you, Eyad. Stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, Ryan, I'm glad that we were able to get that connection to Eyad. It's sometimes very difficult to have a stable connection with people in Gaza.
Yeah, and one programming note: we were going to have our colleague Maz Hussein talk about the Iranian negotiations. He's finishing another interview, and also Sami Al-Arian, I think, broke news for us on those talks. So no offense to Maz, I think we can skip him for today. We can let him off the hook. The only thing I wanted to add to contextualize what Eyad was talking about before we finish, curious if any of your take on this, is every time that Israel has directly inserted itself into the aid distribution system, the result has been chaos and massacres. And if you remember, everybody remembers the Flower Massacre generally, but its importance to this genocide can't be overstated. This was at a period of time, if you recall, when Israel was very aggressively trying to force the entire population out of the northern Gaza, and began a siege of particularly of northern Gaza. They were saying, okay, we will allow aid in to southern Gaza, but not into the north. So if you don't want to starve, you need to move down to the south. And the Biden administration eventually put enough pressure on Israel that it did allow some trucks into northern Gaza after this extended period of starvation. And the first entry of aid that was allowed in is the convoy that was hit with the Flower Massacre. And all of the subsequent reporting that has been done on that suggests that this was deliberate, that this was, okay, you're going to force us to allow in aid. We're going to create a horrific massacre at the scene where this aid will be distributed. So the first step is no aid at all. Second step is, okay, if aid comes in, it's going to come along with bullets. And you're seeing a repeat of that, but at scale now in southern Gaza for the same purpose.
And let's remember too, our colleague Yaniv Kogan did a story about how former Secretary of State Antony Blinken had these meetings with Israeli officials, and the Israeli officials came out of those meetings saying that they understood that Blinken was giving the green light to attack aid convoys that the Israelis would claim were being hijacked by Hamas. And it would be very interesting now to go back and now that Matt Miller, the former State Department spokesperson, is now trying to do his rehabilitation tour by saying, oh, yes, some Israeli soldiers committed war crimes, while his entire job the whole time was to deny Israeli war crimes from the podium. But to ask Antony Blinken about that in light of what Ambassador David Satterfield has said, which is that there was no evidence ever presented by the Israelis that Hamas was engaged in that conduct. And again, I want to emphasize, Satterfield had a reputation within the administration for being incredibly pro-Israel. So I keep bringing this up because it is that significant.
Yeah, Satterfield, for people who don't know, was an unindicted co-conspirator in 2005 in a case involving Israeli espionage, where he was accused of leaking classified information to foreign officials. He was never charged, but he was listed in the indictment as, I think C2 or something like that.
Right. So I mean, this is why this matters. I mean,
he's the one. Yeah.
That he's the one saying no evidence.
Yeah. He went even a step further in that CNN interview, which is fascinating. He even said the Israelis do not even make that claim privately, let alone present evidence for it. They don't even pretend that it's a concern of theirs. It is purely for public consumption.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, in this context matters exactly because of what we've seen this past week, where the Israelis then push this narrative and it gets so amplified in the, on social media that it's, and often by Tammy Bruce now, Matt Miller's replacement as the State Department spokesperson, that Hamas is commandeering or stealing the aid. And, those of us that are really on a granular level following this, that are talking to people inside of Gaza, this is a total inversion of reality. There's substantial evidence that there are actual gangs that are being run or supported by Israel that are in fact the ones hijacking the aid. Right. And the people that are getting bombed and killed by Israel are the local Palestinian law enforcement or security officials who are trying to escort the aid so that these bandits and looters don't come and steal it. I mean, it's crazy making when you actually know the factual reality, and then you log on to the Israeli social media world or many mainstream news organizations that continue to repeat this, even though they themselves can't provide any evidence for it. That's the biggest journalistic crime on this, is that they're repeating Israeli propaganda, knowing that it's propaganda, knowing that we have 19 months of these deadly lethal lies, and not even bothering to say we're going to do our own diligence on it. It reminds me of Antony Blinken admitting, when UNRWA was being painted as a front group for Hamas, that the US hadn't even done its own independent review before moving to cut off UNRWA's funding. Yeah. So anyway, a lot to discuss, Ryan, but I want to thank Dr. Sami Al-Arian, Eyad Amawi for joining us. And as we always remind people, we don't have our content behind a paywall, but we do depend on the support of our readers. And the sort of, if you're in a financial position, the easiest way to support our work is by becoming a paid subscriber to Dropsite News. You can do that at dropsitenews.com. Just click on ways to give, or you can just subscribe. And you can also help us spread the word without making a financial commitment by letting your friends, your family, your foes know about the work of dropsitenews.com. We also have a 501c3 fiscal sponsor, which means that you can make 501c3 tax-deductible donations to support the work of Dropsite News. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, for watching us, for supporting our work, for sharing our work. And also, we have some great reporting from Palestinian journalists. I encourage everybody to check out all of the journalism at dropsitenews.com. On behalf of Ryan Grimm and myself and the entire team at Dropsite News, thank you so much for joining us.